Welcome back to Ta-da! 3D printing. We are on chapter 4 of the MK4 or Mark IV assembly of the kit. Step 1 shows the tools we will need is the 2.5 Allen key and the needle nose pliers. And then we'll look for the Z-bottoms left and right and M3 by 10 screws. We left off finishing the X-axis and now we need to jump back to the frame. And we're looking for these Z-bottoms in the print box. We are looking for the bag entitled Z-axis. This bag has 4 parts and right now we're just looking for the 2 larger ones that are the Z-bottoms. Step 3 is assembling the Z-bottoms. You need to make sure that you have them oriented correctly and secure each side with 3 M3 by 10 screws each. And if needed, it says that you can turn the frame on the back. Okay, this is the correct orientation from above, and you see the little notch that will fit over the frame. And I am going to turn the frame up so that I can have a little bit easier access to the screws. I'm going to start on the left-hand side, and you can see that the screws right there on the left hand, you can see like a triangle where we're going to be attaching them. And the part will look like this. It'll be like a shelf and then almost like a right side wall is the correct orientation for this. And you can just attach these screws in. I start with my battery powered screwdriver, but it has a little bit of trouble on the top 2. So I kind of go back and forth between that and the Allen key. And then do the same thing on the right side. And then once both of these sides are secured, I can flip the frame back up to where it was before. Step 4 is the Z-motor assembly parts preparation, so we're going to get the Z-motor left and the Z-motor right. We are also going to get 8 of the M3 by 10 screws and 2 rubber pads and get out the 3 trapezoid nuts. So each of the motors are found in the motor parts kit, of course, and we have 2 long motors that we're going to be pulling out, and they are labeled in the way that you would be looking at them. So this one is the X-axis left. That one will go on the left-hand side, the way that it's facing right now. And the other one is the X-axis right, and that will go on the right-hand side, how the frame is facing right now. And the 3 trapezoid nuts are also found in the motor kit box. You can see them here. And then in the fasteners box, we are looking for a bag called the Z-axis. And in there, we are looking for the rubber pads for now. The 8 M3 by 10 screws. Step 5, we will attach the rubber pads on each of the motors. And then we will attach each of the motors with 4 screws on each side, not tighten completely. The left side needs to have the shorter cable and the right side needs to have the longer cable. And then gently push the cables through towards the back of the frame. Okay, so we'll set these pads on each of the motors and make sure that the holes line up so we can run the screws through them later. Okay, so I already have the motors in position, but I do need to lift the frame up. The one on the left-hand side is going to be the one with the shorter cable, and this is a little bit tricky to get it positioned right. And then the one on the right-hand side is the one with the longer cable. And I start on the left-hand side and make sure that everything is where it needs to be. You are going to need to lift the motor up a little bit in order for the screws to catch. And it seems like once you have one of them, the motor will stay in position okay and you can attach the other 3. But we're not going to be tightening them down completely. I rotate the frame a little bit so that I can get better access to this right-hand side and then attach the screws. Then on step 7, we're going to be running each of these cables underneath the frame and then plugging them in. The left one that is labeled L will go on the left, and the right one that's labeled R will go on the right. And then we'll just make sure that the cables kind of go along the right side where the zip ties are. The longer one, of course, goes back through the frame, and then it seems like it just runs along the back side of the frame over to the buddy board. Then I'll flip this around so I can see a little bit better and be able to plug them in. And I think I'm going to flip it up a little bit more so that I can see a little bit better. And move my Y motor cord out of the way a little bit. Now I can plug my left cable into the left area and the right one into the right. and make sure that the cables are running along the right side of the buddy board. And it doesn't look like anything will pinch, so I can set it back in place like it was. Step 8 is mounting the X-axis assembly parts preparation. We're going to need 2 of the trapezoid nuts, 4 M3x10 screws, the 2 shortest and thickest rods, and the X holder again. Okay, so we only need 2 of the 3 trapezoid nuts. The other one I put in the parts bag. I get out the correct number of screws. And then in the rods box, we are looking for the 2 that are just a little bit shorter than the other ones, and they're also a little bit thicker. And the X holder, I had put this back in the original bag, so I get it back out again. Step 9 is inserting the smooth rods into the motors. And there are inspection holes on the side, so you can make sure that they are in place. I would suggest wiping these down just a little bit. I did not do that, and I do have a little bit of trouble getting them to actually slip in, and I feel like it's because they're just a little bit slippery. This is what it looks like through the inspection hole. And now I need to do the right hand side as well. This one seems to go a little bit easier. Step 10 is setting the X-axis on the smooth rods, and that X holder is going to keep it in place. We want that to be as centered as possible. I set the X holder first because I figure that's going to be a little bit easier than sliding the X-axis on first. And then I slide the X-axis on. I align it on the left-hand side first and then the right side. So you're going to have not just the smooth rods, but you will also have the threaded rods from the motors that you're going to have to align everything. And then you can kind of just set it on the X holder in the center and it will keep it in place. Step 11 is centering the threaded rods on the Z motors. You're going to start with the right hand side and just slowly tighten each of the individual screws to make sure that the centered threaded rod is going to be centered. And as you tighten, you will see that it moves a little bit. You want it to be centered as it's showing here, not touching any plastic, and then you will proceed with the left motor. This is what I started out with. It was touching a little bit on the lower left side. I spent longer than I thought I would take to get this straight. For some reason I decided on the left side to start with, even though the instructions do say the right side. I don't think it really matters. But I went through and loosened and tightened quite a bit. I think I spent probably close to 10 minutes on both sides, and then I finally felt like, even though it wasn't perfect, the rods were not touching, they were as centered as I could get them. It's a little bit hard to see from the camera angle, but I am able to see all the way around the threaded rod. I'm not seeing the black plastic sticking directly next to it, and this is as close as I can get it. Step 12 is assembling the trapezoid nuts. You want to make sure that the smaller portion is facing down because it's going to fit inside of the other part. And you will secure with 2 screws. It doesn't matter which holes you are able to use. And then the same for the other side as well. Again, I start on the left-hand side, and this fits fine into place. It doesn't feel like anything's too snug, but I do have to use the hex key in order to tighten the screws. My screwdriver is not going to be able to get in this tight angle. And on the right hand side, it is a little bit snugger. I feel like I have to kind of spin the nut in order to get it down into place. But I don't have any issues aligning it or tightening the screws. But I feel like getting that centered overall was a lot of work, so I'm going to have a few more extra gummy bears. Step 13 is installing the Z-top parts for the left and the right. And we will need 4 of the M3x10 screws. We will set these in place and align them with the frame and screw in 2 on each side. And it says if you need a little bit more space, you can move the X-axis down a little bit. And then the Z-tops are the other 2 pieces that were located in that same bag. The hole faces towards the outer front edge, and then the part kind of curves back in towards the frame and inner. And more M3x10 screws. At this point, I'm kind of wondering why the whole machine is not put together by the same screws, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. That hole provides just a little bit of an opening for the smooth rods on the outer edge. And these slip into place okay. I start off by trying to use my battery-powered screwdriver, but I'm not able to use that on the inner corner. I do have to get the other screwdriver out, and I end up using the hex key in the end. This is kind of tricky to get that inner corner. And then I move on to the right-hand side, and I just go ahead and do the hex key for this one to secure it. And now that everything's secured in place, I can just gently twist the threaded rods so that I can remove the X holder. Step 15, we are going to find the love board, the extruder main cable, and one M3 by 6 screw. The love board is found in the fasteners box. There is a smaller box entitled the electronics box. This is a box that you are going to have to cut open. And after looking at the pictures on the top, I realize that it's the smaller bubble wrapped part. And then the cable that you're looking for is in the same Z-axis bag that you got the rubber pads out of. It's the thickest one. And one single screw. Step 16 is assembling the love board. We are going to take the main cable, the side without the white label. We will center the X carriage on the X-axis and also on the Z-axis. And then we'll guide the main cable in through the printer, the gap between the belt and the upper rod. We'll divide the twisted and the straight cables, and we'll start with the straight cables and push that into a channel on the X carriage, and then the twisted cables after. And then we'll connect the cable to the love board and leave a little bit of space above. So I want to center the X carriage. That one's pretty easy on the X axis, but to do the Z axis, I'm going to have to go and figure out which direction I need to be going, but I'll just be twisting the threaded rods and it'll slowly move down. Then I get the cable and make sure I have the end that does not have a tag on it, and I run that through the printer and set that in place. And then I separate the straight and the twisted cables, and I slip the straight cables in first into the X carriage. There is a channel there that's very visible, and you can see pretty easily how to slip that in. And then next is the twisted cables. This is how it looks after that. And then we're going to unwrap the love board and plug that in and just leave a little bit of slack. Step 18, we can attach the love board to the back of the X carriage with the one screw, and then very gently pull on the main cable bundle to get any slack out. And make sure all of these cords are facing down, not going over into the space on the right. It's a little easier to attach this if you're on the back side of the printer. The opening for the screw is well marked though. And when I finish with that, I'm able to just pull on the cords a little bit to make sure there's no slack. And then back on the front side, I make sure that the cords are not interfering at all. They're just really nice and tight and pulled as snug as possible. Step 19 is attaching the X carriage cable holder. So we're going to get that as well as one M3 by 40 screw. You will insert the screw from the flat side. You can see on the right hand side there's a little bit of a lip that continues on past the screw. And then we'll attach this under the X carriage, under the main cable, and tighten it. We want to make sure not to pinch any wires though. This part is found in the Z-axis bag, and you might as well get out both pieces that mimic each other, that are kind of long and skinny. But first we're looking for the one that has an opening for a screw. And you start the screw from this side, the flat side. It just slips in, it's not something that needs to be threaded in. And we need to attach this on the back side of the printer. Make sure all of the cords are out of the way and secure it in place. Step 21, we are going to get the X carriage back, one more rubber pad, two M3 by 18 screws, one M3 by 10 screw, and a nylon that will help hold everything in place. We'll put the rubber pad in the pocket, insert one of the bent ends of the nylon filament into the hole located at the left side of the extruder, and it should curve upwards as shown in this picture. This is the X carriage back, and it's found in the same bag as the other items, and we'll go ahead and put the rubber pad in. And I've got the screws ready. And the nylon is just a small plastic piece, not these fabric cable covers. And then we'll stick the nylon into the opening and make sure that it faces upwards and towards the printer. Step 23 is attaching the X cover back. We want to make sure that the upper bearing is in the pocket and also the marking is facing you. The nylon needs to be pointing upwards. Then we will set the back onto the X carriage and secure with 2 screws. We want to make sure nothing is pinched. We start with the 2 longer screws and then we finish with the shorter screw. Okay, and make sure that the bearing is where it needs to be. Then I set the back plate in place, and I do push down the cables a little bit, and then I secure it with a screw. This is what it looks like from another angle. And I finished tightening that screw and then the other one as well. These are both of the longer M3x18 screws that are on the bottom or the lower side of the back plate. And then I fasten the smaller M3x10 screw in the middle. And then I just go back and make sure that everything is tightened completely. Step 24, we're looking for the longest textile sleeve, 2 zip ties, and then the X carriage cable holder cover, which is the one we set aside in the previous step. Step 25, we will push the 2 zip ties through the X carriage cable holder. There are some areas that we can slip that in. The correct orientation is to have the slick side out and the head on the right hand side. Then we'll wrap the main cable and the nylon filament with the textile sleeve, give a little bit of a gap behind the X carriage, and then just wrap this section here like an inch or 2 down. We can then set the cable holder cover in place and tighten the zip ties down. And the end position, you're going to want them on the lower left hand side of the holder cover. Once that's complete, we will continue to wrap the cable bundle all the way with the textile. This will be in a spiral, and also we want the cable to kind of come up and over as shown in this picture. And the textile sleeve is found in this Z-axis bag. It is the longest and thickest one. And we'll need the 2 zip ties. I assume they do some sort of burning when they cut this textile sleeve because it does seem like it's stuck or melted at the very ends, just at the both ends. And then once you unwrap it a little bit, it works fine. So I wrap just a few inches just to make sure that I'll have plenty of space and it's not going to feel like it's going to unravel on me. And then I set the cover. The largest portion goes towards the frame, and you'll see that the zip ties will line up. And I decided I needed to make my bundle just a little bit tighter so that this would feel like it would cover and not be pinching anything. Then I can attach the zip ties and tighten them up and make sure that they're in this notch all the way around the bottom plastic part and the top one as well. This first one I started off right and then I flipped it over for some reason, so this one is not positioned right and I end up fixing it later when I notice that it doesn't quite fit. But the second one I do correctly. That one you need to have the head on the right hand side, and then when you tighten it, it's fine that it comes around to the left, but you can see that the ends are a little different, and I realized that this lower one, the one closer to me, is not gonna fit in there quite right when I'm trying to snip it. So I end up there's plenty of extra zip ties, so I end up cutting it off and re-securing it the correct way. And now that they're both tightened, you can see that they both kind of head off to the left direction, and that's correct. You can slip them just a little bit more and make sure that they're in the right position, and then I snip off the excess. Now that the top is secure, it'll be a lot easier to wrap the fabric around the cable because it's not going to be slipping around. It's already secured, so that makes it a lot easier. But make sure that you're also wrapping the filament, the nylon filament as well, because that will help give it the correct orientation to be able to plug into the buddy board on the right, up and over to the right. And it helps me to take one of the hex keys and just kind of run it along the outer edge of this textile fabric cover because it helps kind of just keep the section open as I'm pushing the cable in. That works for me. And then from this angle you can see that the other end is almost kind of melted, and you have to use a little more pressure to get the cables in. I make sure that everything is completely wrapped and that it does want to go up to the right, and that looks like it'll work. Step 27 is attaching the exterior cable holder. There are two parts to this, and then one zip tie will need 2 M3x18 screws, 2 M3x10 screws, 2 M3NS, the square nuts, and then the textile sleeve, that's the shortest and thinnest. We will wrap the X motor cable. Both parts of this cable holder are the last items left in this bag, and they look like this. Then I've got the one zip tie, the smallest textile fabric cover, and all of the screws. I turn the frame so that I can get over to this cable bundle a little bit easier, and wrap this one up as well. It's not going to completely cover it all the way down to the plug though. Step 29 is attaching the cable holder. We're going to take the 2 square nuts and set them in the side of the cable holder A. Take the bent end of the nylon filament and slip that into the hole on the cable holder A. Guide both of the cables away from the printer. Run the main cables through the notch in the holder. And then the X cables need to go onto the left-hand side notch of this holder, but it needs to go over the main cables, not underneath. This is the main cable A that we're looking for. It's got a hole on the inside, and then also you can see the areas where the square nuts need to go on the side. These go in pretty easily, but I do also take the pliers and just make sure that they're completely pushed into place. Then I get the main cable and direct it towards this holder and get the nylon filament, the plastic piece with the bent edge, and attach that into the hole of the cable holder. I see where it is, but it's not fitting well for me, so I get one of the larger hex keys and just run that through just to make sure that there's nothing catching and that I can put this piece in there correctly. That kind of helps hold the main cables in place, but you do need to make sure that you have positioned them to run through the holder and that it's smooth. I did have to twist things a little bit just to get them to all fit in there. And then we can run the X cable through this same holder, but we do need to make sure that it's running over the main cables, and it'll run through this smaller section there. There's a little channel there that it'll fit. Step 31, we will attach the cable holder B to the cable holder A and put in the 2 M3x18 screws. And then on the larger main cable, we want to secure it with a zip tie. So I set this cable holder B on top, and I do have to do a little bit of wiggling to make sure that everything is going to fit and nothing's going to be pinched. And then I can secure it with the 2 screws. The screws are on the very outer edge though, so it's not like the screw would catch on any wires. I just hand tighten both of those in until they catch on the back piece, and then I can use my battery powered screwdriver to finish it up, which helps a lot for me because you're holding it with one and it's kind of difficult to screw with the other side. So to have the battery powered helped me out a lot. And this is how it should look when it's done. And then you can attach the zip tie along the back edge, and there is a notch to hold it in place. Trim off the excess. Step 32 is attaching the cables into the buddy box. We want to make sure that nothing gets twisted and that the smaller X cable doesn't get stuck behind the main cable. Then we can attach it with the 2 M3x10 screws, and all of the cables inside will remain free for now. Then we'll make sure that both of the cables are like in the picture, nothing is crossing over each other. So I gently guide each of the plugs through the hole in the top of the buddy board. I start with the main cable because all of those wires are a little bit longer, and it's also the larger plug of the 2. Once I get that one in, I can kind of pull down a little bit and get the smaller X cable in as well. And then I just pull gently and wiggle it a little bit until it sits flush. And then we can attach the screws to make sure that it's secured in place. The one on the inner right I'm not going to be able to get to with my screwdriver, so I have to use the hex key. And then I spin it around to make sure everything looks right, the spacing is correct on the cables, and it looks like we're done. Step 33 is to eat some more gummy bears and check that everything looks like in the picture. So I flip the printer around to make sure everything looks correct. It looks good to me, so I'm ready to move on to the next chapter. If you are finding these videos helpful, consider joining my membership. Thanks for watching.